The LLMs are going to be 90% better than you at everything, except this one thing. The only way to differentiate yourself against AI is that you have to be a crazy niche specialist in something. And that one thing, that's your job.
Brandon, I had a different relationship with him. He was my manager, and then he invested in our startup. He was part of Shopify, early days.
Just to show you how fast Shopify was growing, like when the team started, it was like 20 people. In 18 months, we're 250 people.
Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or Toby, because they are product obsessed, they become the CEO. It's much easier to learn the CEO skills rather than the product skills.
It's not a universal rule, but at least true of Shopify is that like Toby is the product. He is a dictator when it comes to the product, and that is 80% of its success.
What are the things that this time you're doing differently, knowing that you joined Shopify and now you are creating another company of your own?
The bar for software is as low as it could ever be. Things that used to take literally 5 years, you can build in 1 week now. What changes then? If there's going to be like a million times more software out there, everyone in the world's not going to value software anymore. What you build needs to be like really, really good.
They invested in us, and then they actually sent a bunch of their marketing team to Iran to help us with Facebook ads. They did not know at the time that Facebook and Google and everything else. So we had to create a lot of local ways of actually marketing our product.
Facebook is probably, in the history of businesses, probably the best business of all time. It ended up being like maybe the most important thing I've ever done in my own professional career, which is even just to you for this conversation, like to show you
Would love to.
what I'm working on. So this thing is called Every.ai. There's one reason we think that this market will grow. People are getting laid off everywhere.
Perfect. Amazing. How are you doing, brother? It's been a while.
It's been a long time. Yeah, we were just talking about how long. It has probably been like...
How come I don't hear your voice?
You don't hear my voice at all? Have I come closer here? No?
Oh, okay. Here.
Oh, there you go. Actually, I hear my own voice.
Yeah, which is fine, actually.
Okay.
I know it's going to be a little bit discomforting to begin with, but you get used to it.
Oh, to hear your own voice.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
because that's the idea. Like you want to monitor your voice.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, how you doing, brother?
I'm good. It's been a while, probably like 3-4 years, I think, since we sat down and had like a real conversation. Things are good. I left Shopify like 3 years ago, and I took a year off. I have 2 young boys. We like traveled the world a bit. I like took up tennis. I started playing tennis like 15-20 hours a week. And then after that, getting that all out of my system, focusing on health, family. Then last couple of years, I've just been like diving in and building lots of different products, using everything under the sun in terms of AI and stuff like that, just because it's so fun and everything's changing. But yeah, things are great.
Your name came up on my podcast quite a few times. One of the reasons is that the story of us after Toonsy. So number one is Brandon. I had a different relationship with him. He was my manager, and then he invested in our startup, Better Mode, and then he was part of Shopify, early days. So one of the reasons that your name came up a few times on my podcast was that I was telling this story that how after the acquisition of Toonsy, we end up in New York. Mm-hmm. You didn't come, and then you joined Shopify. And at the time, Shopify was not a household name. You know, it was an early startup.
Actually, there's another chapter in between. So I first joined FreshBooks, actually.
Wasn't it before?
No. Like I first joined FreshBooks as a product manager. And I was there for about like 3.5 years. And then I joined Shopify.
Yeah. Oh, how long was that for?
FreshBooks, like about 3.5 years. Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah. It was like I joined just after they raised Series B, and I stayed through raising Series C, and I think I joined as like a PM, and I left as like a director of product or something like that.
That's actually a very interesting conversation for me, because I've been living with this idea of after the startup that we had, should I also, or could I also join an upcoming startup, or should I just do what I wanted to do? Mm-hmm. And right now, probably this is something that we have to talk about later, but I'm no longer with Better Mode. And this question is actually something that is repeating for me again, mm-hmm. that should I join a big company, especially right now, that because there are so many things are happening.
Yeah.
Like I was like thinking about like Anthropic or maybe Nvidia, because I have friends there, and I would be able to get to talk to a bunch of people, and just there are so many also open positions, and they are basically right now they're looking for, a lot of them are looking for product thinkers and builders. And this is something that comes to my mind a lot. Like, so how was your experience on FreshBooks and Shopify?
Yeah, I think at the time, well, going to that question about joining a company or not, at the time, like Toonsy, when we were together working on that company, that was like my first ever foray into entrepreneurship, one, but then even tech at all. Like, you remember, like, I didn't know anything about like code or anything like that. And like, even through that, I remember I was like shipping crazy random changes to like the website and stuff like that. And so that was my first, I think, like foray into tech at all and software at all. But before that, I'd come like through education. I was more in like the finance background and stuff like that. And so for me, one of the big reasons I wanted to take a job somewhere is because I recognize I still have so much to learn. Like, I only have this crazy one view of what technology is. And that was from my own entrepreneurial experience, which is like very unique, right? And it's not like I could spend every day just like crafting the product. We had to focus on all the other things like marketing and fundraising and payroll and all that type of stuff. And so that was a lot of it. Just wanting to understand, like, okay, I'm no longer, in the finance world. I want to work in startups in technology. What else do I not know about that? So taking a job somewhere like taught me a lot of things at FreshBooks in particular, I guess, about like what even it was to have like a more at scale product with lots of different teams working at it. How do you develop software with at that type of scale, et cetera. And so that was like my thought process through those things. So I think, like, if you contrast it to today, I think everyone can actually say, they don't know what the future holds or what the AI software industry is going to be like, because it's forming real time in front of us. So I think regardless if you like go try to do your own thing or you join a company, just at least make sure, I'd say, that it's like really AI forward, right? Because it's rewriting not just software, but it's going to rewrite everything. And so, always chase the maximum amount of learning, I think, that you can at any time. And it makes life more interesting.
Did you get lucky, you think, when you joined Shopify? Because the risk and reward versus like doing your own thing, because we always wanted to do a startup.
Totally.
But Shopify also, from what I heard, is kind of a startup at a time, like not as a company, but like even the internal processes, like a small team, big company, but it's still, you have your own capacity to be able to do the stuff that you wanted to do. Yeah. And it's among one of those rare companies, Canadian companies, that went public. And to some extent, it performed well, but I'm not sure what happened with the stock. But
yeah, I mean, it was, to say I was lucky is an understatement, I'd say. Like, yes, I worked really hard. I did take a bet to join Shopify. So, like, for context, when I was at FreshBooks, just before I joined Shopify, I was a director of product, and I think I forgot exactly what I was making. But basically, the only positions at Shopify available was just like an individual product manager, like an IC product manager. And so, like, that's like maybe 3-level demotion from title. But the reason I joined, despite that, is because I looked at the people and I looked at the product, and I'm like, this is just a different level, right? When you just logged into Shopify, even back then, you're like, wow, this is like, it's way more performant, right? It's sophisticated in terms of like the ways that it automates things. It gives you like certain little like design niceties, like how you like bulk edit 10,000 orders and stuff like that. Like, oh, there's some really thoughtful people in this company, and they have like a higher bar of craftsmanship. And so that was like what drew me, I think, the most to it, and why I was willing to sacrifice title and a lot of stock at FreshBooks at the time and stuff like that. And so, I think like I made one really good decision to like chase the company that I felt had a better product and was growing faster. But after that, there's so much that was out of my control that was just pure luck. Like when I joined, if I like normalize the stock price to today, I think I joined at $3.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's like, I think today it's like $120 or something like that.
And you mentioned a very good point. The reason that I got attracted to the startups, and initially I decided to do my own thing, was that I was joining these very early startups because I wanted to go very equity heavy. I was not too much about salary. I wanted to do something that at the end of the day, you would be able to actually cash out as well, big time. But that was not the reason. The reason was that I was joining these early companies, but I was seeing the way that they are being ran, and then I wanted to create my own environment, the type of people that I like to work with, the philosophy that I wanted to work with. But one of the things that I think is less discussed is the fact that you wouldn't be necessarily able to attract talents at that stage. Like this is not Silicon Valley. This is something that we have to learn. Like even back in Iran when I was doing my own startup, because of my connections and because of the competition was not so high, I could attract a lot of talents. But here, for example, one of the challenges that we had with our own startup here was like finding talents. It's not that easy. Like especially post-COVID, that this work from home became norm. A lot of people started working remotely for US companies, like compensations were like unbeatable.
Yeah.
And
prestige is more brand recognition. There's every reason in the world, if you're a new grad.
And US dollars itself.
Yeah, US dollars and the exchange rate to go want to work for an American company. I think like anyone, as much as I want the system to be different and for like all our Waterloo grads and stuff like that to stay in Canada and build startups here, it doesn't, if I'm one of those individuals, I'm probably not making that decision, right? I think Shopify was really interesting because that was definitely the case for them. Like I remember I joined just in 2015, and I'd say, like, no exaggeration, 90% of the calls I would get on, whether it's an interview, like with an external person, like an interview or a partner or whatever, like they would mistakenly call it Spotify in the call. Even in someone applying for a job there, they would call it Spotify because there's no brand recognition at all. And it's this random Canadian company, had like a $3 billion market cap. And there's even more factors. It's like also from Ottawa, right? It's from a smaller city within Canada. And so there were so many reasons why it would be impossible, you would think, to attract talent. But what Toby and the team did there that I think is amazing is like they said, okay, they had that self-awareness. What if we monopolize talent in an area that we have outsized recognition? So in Ottawa, for example, they were hiring 80% of the graduating computer science classes out of like Carleton University and University of Ottawa.
No experience prior to that.
Yeah, no experience prior to that. They were hiring kids at a high school that showed like high potential, high promise, right? And the reality is, like, I don't care where you're from, there are people that are just like legit geniuses out of anywhere.
And I remember that they made a lot of noise the way that they hire, as long as you have an entrepreneurial spirit, as long as you're doing something, we don't care what your title is, just join us.
They were hiring. I remember Toby hired some, I have no idea what happened with this individual, but they like hired someone off Twitter because they found out on Twitter in a Twitter thread that like they were like a top 10 ranked StarCraft player. Right. And I think there's some truth to that. Yeah. If you achieve excellence in anything, you're already made so different than most people that you can probably, like, from a pure persistence work ethic perspective, right, and striving and ambition, that you can probably translate that to anything. You could probably apply it to anything. And so I think Shopify developed a quiet reputation of like having a lot of really, really smart people who were humble, and like it kind of played into like the Canadian stereotypes and all these types of things. That like thought so deeply about the product and had a really, really high ambition. And I think that is no clearer than like Toby himself. Without meeting him, I don't think I ever would have joined. He just really conveyed that in a believable way, saying like, this is day zero. or day one of the company, even though they were like public they had just turned public when I was interviewing with him. And he really convinced me that like they actually have global ambition, being a small Canadian company in Ottawa, right? And it was absolutely true. And so it's really interesting when people came into the company, as the company's kind of like awareness grew in the world, like and the respect and brand recognition grew as well, is that it caught up to what actually was, I think, always actually true in his mind, about how big this company could be. And credit to him though is like you have to fight a lot of forces inside the company and outside of the company to keep people aiming that high. It's not normal for a bunch of Canadians in a small company in Ottawa to say we're going to take over the world's commerce infrastructure, right? Like you have to be a little bit crazy, and you have to be very consistent, and like and credit to him and the company, they built a culture where that was really deep in the DNA.
And if you do recall those days, I think we are talking about the time that we moved to New York, which you just mentioned that you joined FreshBooks, but it was like 2014, 2013. And then I do recall that the narrative was that Canada is going to be the next Silicon Valley. The hype was very high in terms of this is going to be the place to be. That necessarily did not happen. Like one of the reason that I actually like also stayed was that I was trying to be part of this. I was like, okay, being underdog, I always love to be the underdog, because you always have something to catch up with, to compete with, that didn't happen. But the fact that Shopify, I think they also monopolized the talent.
Yeah.
Like the rest of the companies didn't get any.
Yes.
They start getting.
There was an era, I'd say like 2017 to 2022. Even you could argue today. Yeah, they were like the name, and they were able easily in Canada. They monopolized the talent, but we were also able to like pull a lot of usually Canadians, but that they were in the Valley, and we were able to pull them back home, which was crazy.
No way.
A lot. Usually though, it's like a good timing thing. So basically, like they imagine you graduated from university here, you went to the Valley, and you worked for like 10, 15 years. And now like you're married and you're going to have some kids and something. And you're thinking about that next phase of your life, kind of middle age. There was a lot of those people are like executives or higher ranked people, so to speak. And so we were able to catch a lot of people coming back or wanting to raise their family back home in Canada, but then never thought about it because they're like, well, I can't give up my high-flying career here. I worked so hard for that. But then now, like, oh no, there's actually a tier A company in Canada that has global impact, and you can have both. You can raise your family, where you're from, come back to Canada, and still execute at that high level with people that are at that high level.
How was your experience when from a startup that you founded on your own with no experience before being in tech and then joining a big, not big at a time,
growth stage kind of company.
But how was your onboarding? Did you have a like sort of a culture shock? Did you were like, oh my God, what these guys are doing? Or no, it wasn't that much of a difference?
I wouldn't say culture shock. Like it was FreshBooks was a very fun place. Really great people as well. I still have a lot of good friends from there. And I would say it was more, they're like these growth stage startups, they're actually quite chaotic too, right? So in a way, it felt very familiar, but I just had a higher tolerance for what crazy meant to me, right? So people, I would say, freaked out a little more often and a little easier than I did, because I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like, this bug's affecting 20% of users and this data's corrupted or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, well, we'll solve it. Let's just solve it. Whereas people like they wouldn't be able to handle that type of pressure or whatever it is, that chaos. So I think that was a good thing from coming from like a really small startup, of which I was a co-founder, is sort of like the bar for anxiety and pressure is so much higher than in any company, and it's always going to be, right? You're an employee somewhere, it's never going to be the same as the pressure you feel, I think, when it's all on you, especially when you have like, teammates and people that are relying on you and things like that. But the learning curve was high in terms of like, you remember when we were building that thing, we were just making everything up as we go, right? We're making decisions on the fly. We're not validating anything. It's all just judgment. And, hopefully we made some good calls along the way. But when the thing I learned is like, when you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers, like they're risky changes, right? You actually have to know you're right. And there's a cost to being wrong. And so really I'd say product management, which I ended up joining as a craft, is sort of that craft, is like, how do you actually know you're right? What is the process, right, to take what either the business needs or users and customers need, and how do you decide what is the right thing to pour your energy and resources into and ship it? And so that's fundamentally the whole thing. The whole craft is basically that. And so, you can only learn that, I'd say, when you have an actual business, when you actually have users, because if there's no risk, right? If you're so early in a startup and you're just throwing stuff against the wall, it's a different type of problem, right? You're more trying to find the problem to solve, actually, and find your initial, like, even 10 users or customers, right? It's less about like weighing like, well, we could do these 100 different things, and this one's a little bit more risky than this one, and this one's a little bit technically unknown, and blah blah. Like, you're not thinking that way, because you don't have the luxury yet, kind of thing. So you do learn something very different. And then at Shopify, it was even more so, because FreshBooks was at maybe, I want to say, 30,000 customers type scale. And then my journey at Shopify, it started, I probably joined them when they were at like 100,000 customers. And when I left, it was like 2.5 million, 3 million customers. And these are businesses, each with their own employees as well. So it's like, and they're all selling to thousands of end customers. So the network on Shopify was hundreds of millions of people. So, it's like much bigger, more dramatic type of decisions that you have to make.
And there is another aspect to joining a company like Shopify, is that when you're running in a startup, you most likely, in most positions, you're the only one. Like there's one PM probably, or there's one engineer, a few of them, so you don't get the benefit of having a group of people like brainstorming, thinking together, and being able to point at what is wrong with that decision, and what is the conflict, or what is the justification of this decision.
You don't have to defend it. You don't have to defend your decisions.
True.
Right? It says, oh, you do the design. I'll figure out pricing. All right, ship it. Are you done? Yeah, I'm done. No one's saying, is that the right decision or not? Right? Or it doesn't happen as often. So I think like, that rigor of like, oh, like I want to take, I'm in Shopify now, and it's like, oh, I want to take this team and spend the next 6 months building this feature. Right? Well, I have to like justify that to like Toby, because there's only so many teams, and they could also be building this other thing that maybe he thinks is really, really important.
Were you reporting directly to him?
No. I was reporting to Craig Miller, who is like the CPO, Chief Product Officer. But, and something else I learned through Shopify is just like, it's not a universal rule, but at least true of Shopify, is that like Toby is the product. He is a dictator when it comes to the product, and that is 80% of its success.
And honestly, like that's a very interesting topic, because the thing is that the position of CEO, and we talked a lot about it. Like it's known, it's those type of easy stuff that everyone talks about, that the CEO should be the product person, especially in these type of tech companies. We think of Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or Toby, because they are product obsessed. They become the CEO. It's much easier to learn the CEO skills rather than the product skills, which honestly, because then they have a point of view, like there is already a bias built in to the thinking that they have, rather than they look at the numbers and say, okay, this is what the analytics says, so let's do that. And then other people that they are not in product, or they don't have the gut feeling or instinct for what they should be doing, basically say, that's easy. I look at the numbers, being data driven, and I make that calls based on that data.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that a lot of that, the hard part is that a lot of that comes down to these like intangible, like things like taste, right? Toby has good taste in products. Like when he uses something, he gets an instinctual, like, this is shit, or this is really joyful to use. And sometimes he's able to articulate that in ways that other people can leverage it. So maybe they can, one like design, I guess, like pattern or product design pattern we had in Shopify was sort of this analogy of Super Mario and Super Mario getting superpowers and having, and Shopify being like that. It's like, it's easy to play. It's easy to start a store and be an entrepreneur. But then when you start to learn the product more and more, you get all these superpowers that allow you to do way more than you ever thought you could. And then also the way you design a level in a game is like the first few levels are very, very easy. Like you can't even lose. You just walk through them and you kind of learn how the game works. But then you can also go to the when you get down to the advanced levels, right after that training, then you should be able to do more and more and more. And so there's like a progressive disclosure design system in Shopify where like that's what you see on the surface is like a very simple, like add an order or whatever it may be. But if you need to, let's say I need to add that order and then route it to this warehouse and then ship it from there with this different tax rate, it actually is there, but it's progressively disclosed in the design in a way that doesn't bother the 80-90% of users that never need that complex feature, right? So it's like, that's just an example of like something that we did our best as a product organization and design organization to write down for people so that everyone in the company could design products with those kind of principles, but that essentially originally came from his own sense of intuition and taste. You see what I'm saying? And so there's always this like tricky thing where it's like these amazing founders or product people, so much of it is just intuitive. Their whole life experience, whatever it is that they did, however they see the world, has helped them develop an intuition and feeling of what's good and what's bad. And I found a lot, and I found a lot of what makes an at-scale organization is how well you can help pull those principles out of someone's brain or out of their soul in a way, and make it a framework that the rest of the company can use.
Because at the end of the day, you're building something for yourself. That's something that you wanted to use on your own.
Totally, right? And then in Shopify's case, like that intuition led to a version of the product that really was compelling to lots of people. And the soul and the taste that went into that product, for that to scale to now like an international product that can do multiple currencies and sell in person and sell online and sell on ChatGPT and all these types of things, you have to still keep that same design sense somehow, even though the world is changing, because that is what gravitated customers to the platform in the first place.
What do you think is the cause that some people can work at that scale? Because at some point we also wanted to be working in that scale as well, right? Like Shopify, at the end of the day, you would be able to argue it's a website builder, Betamode is a community website builder, a lot of website builders are out there. Yep. The idea is not novel. How do you think someone would be able to go and think that big?
Like that opportunity around data?
Yeah. Did they have a modest start and eventually become this big? I understand everything starts small and then becomes big, but there is this notion that they had a vision of, the narrative of their marketing is also everyone can be an entrepreneur, so the way that and actually that's a very hard thing to do, because then you are solving for a lot of different ICP. I would be able to sell. At the end of the day, it's e-commerce, so the feature sets are going to be obvious.
Yeah. Well, let's remember, Shopify is not an overnight story. 2006 is when it formed, 20 years. And I don't know the exact number, but I want to say the first 5-6 years, it took them to get to 10,000 customers or something like that, which is not nothing. But again, these are SMBs. They're not paying them a lot. They're not making a lot of money. One of the, I think, unsung heroes of Shopify is Craig Miller, the guy I was mentioning that I reported into. Before he was a CPO, he was a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer.
Taste.
And what he really figured out is actually 2011, 2012 is actually when Facebook ads for businesses became available. And he figured out basically how to get growth hack the crap out of Facebook and to use their ad platform to find people that people would not have thought, I'm going to go to Facebook to find SMB customers. But then he knew that this product and a lot of the entrepreneurs on Shopify, like these people are actually like regular people that run side businesses, right? There might be like a stay-at-home mom that's like selling some pajamas or whatever it may be.
Did Facebook Marketplace existed at that time?
Not Facebook Marketplace. I'm talking about...
I understand. But I wanted to know if the idea, because WordPress, WooCommerce, everything existed back then, you know?
Totally.
So probably like creating something easier to be able to sell. And then probably people are already selling on Facebook Marketplace. I don't think that Facebook Marketplace existed at that time.
I actually know that arc too, because that happened while we were working with Facebook.
But it's still to this date, it is true that Facebook is working like crazy. Even right now, I'm actually watching a bunch of entrepreneurs that they are at a scale. You know, they are saying that if you are about to spend 10, 20, 30K a month, you have to only be on Facebook ads. You know, only then if you are going to spend beyond 50K, then utilize even Instagram, that you would also argue that it's Facebook, but other platforms, even Google ads, even paying to be sponsored on Google ads on SEO, like above and beyond 50K. So if you have a small amount of money, the most return on investment that you would get is going to be from the Facebook ads. And I don't know what they did. Was it Facebook Pixel that they performed this good? Even back in Iran, when I actually created the online food ordering service, we attracted some investors from Greece that they already had an online food ordering service in Greece. They sold it, and because they had the know-how, they came and invested in us and said that we know the game. We know how to make this work, you know, so they invested in us. And then they actually sent a bunch of their marketing team to Iran to help us with Facebook ads. They did not know at the time that Facebook and Google and everything else were pretty much filtered or sanctioned in Iran. And that's one of the challenges that we had at the time. So we had to create a lot of local ways of actually marketing our product.
Well, I mean, Facebook is probably like, in the history of businesses, probably the best business of all time, right? If you look at like the amount of dollars they earn per user, which they have billion, like literally half the world's on Facebook, you know, they make in North America, I think they make like $50-$60 per user on ads. Like it's like one of the best run. They just print money. And but this, like going back to the story, like this 2012, this is the early days of that. Early from Facebook's point of view, right? They were still just in growth mode, get as many users as possible. Like Sheryl Sandberg is the one that's like growing the business and all that type of stuff, right? And so Shopify became a poster child for how to use Facebook ads. So Facebook, the company is promoting Shopify to other businesses, like other corporate businesses, saying, this is how you use our platform to grow your business. That's how good Shopify was at this. And so when Craig came and he assembled his team, and then they started growing this thing, like, you know, Shopify was at like 10,000 users. It went to like 100,000 in like a year, right? So there's like inflection point. It was never a steady curve. Just inflection points and breakthroughs and all these types of things that happened along the way that, you know, continued to accelerate that growth, open up that market. You know, even e-commerce when Shopify started was like 0.5% of, or even less. I think it was like 0.1% of retail was on e-commerce. And so, you know, there's something interesting, I think, in how like Shopify, despite everything, it still also needed to be right time, right place.
Did you join pre-IPO?
Like literally the week of. So, which, you know, when I even joined, I was like, oh, maybe I joined way too late.
You were rich instantly.
No, because I got post IPO stock. Right? I didn't get pre-IPO stock. I got post IPO stock, and I was like, oh boy. Maybe I joined
price
this.
Was known at a time.
Yeah, I was like, maybe I joined this too late, but I was still like, for all the reasons, that wasn't even like the main reason I joined. Right? I mean, that was a factor, of course, but it was just like, yeah, this is really smart people, and this is like the best company I've ever had the ability to join. So I'm going to go learn a ton and frankly see if I can even make it here. That was another part in my mind, is like, am I even good enough to be in this company? Right. And it was crazy. It grew crazier than my wildest dreams. I remember when I joined, I made a spreadsheet, as I usually would. And I said, like, here's my salary, or here's my stock options or whatever. And then I made a bunch of different possible outcomes for the company. I was like low, medium, high, really great outcome, and then I was like, okay, well, one of these is going to happen. And that's, that's how much this, from like financially, that's how much this could be, beneficial to me. And it like blew it out of the water. Like even my best outcome. It was
honest question. The return on investment, you are like this newly aged working with agents, 24/7. I see it. I see it. It's true.
Sorry, actually. You probably can't see it on camera, but I have my laptop here.
It is like your camera is actually in the scene.
Oh yeah, okay. And for this other startup that I'm working on now, we have agents working a lot. So sometimes I just have to say, to nudge them along. Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah,
don't make mistakes.
Don't make mistakes.
The return and the reward and the amount of work, how would you compare it? Like, in a sense that, do you really feel like I'm not sure how much you cashed out, but you cashed out enough that you invested in us and a bunch of other startups.
Sure.
And then you're like living comfortably. So compare that to like someone working on another startup, working that hard, like I understand the luck part of it. You got lucky, you made a right calls. Like I'm not putting it all to luck, but grinding versus one good chance.
I would still say, I worked harder at Shopify than I did in the startup. I worked harder at Shopify than I have in anything in my life.
But you were also much more energetic, with more people around you, with more smart people pushing you. You actually came to a bit of a fame on Twitter. Not sure why, because one of your articles went viral or something?
Yeah, there was a bunch of things that happened. So like, I joined as an individual contributor PM. Shopify was growing really fast. I decided then I'm going to start blogging a little bit more about like my experiences at FreshBooks and Shopify, actually, of being a product manager. And then as I got promoted there, et cetera, et cetera. And that became really popular, like so popular that I'd say there was an era, maybe like, 20-30% of applicants into the company's Shopify's product roles came in like through my blog.
Wow.
And it was really interesting. I've mentioned this on other podcasts, but it's really interesting because it ended up being like maybe the most important thing I've ever done in my own professional career, which is like writing those posts. Because what happened was so funny. Inside the because it got really popular outside of the company, outside of Shopify, I ended up getting indirectly respect inside the company. So people and teams I never worked with, they just now assumed that I was smart and right.
True.
And then all the people that were outside of the company that joined, a lot of them had read my stuff. And so what's interesting is when they joined the company, and even if they joined my team or not, they already knew how I thought about things. And so I was already like kind of programming product managers to think the way I do about it before they even joined the company. And all these things really helped my career inside of Shopify. Like I had a pretty fast career there. I think I got promoted like 5 times, maybe in 5 years. And then I was like a really young and early VP of product there. And so, all those things, yes, I worked really hard, but to go back to your, the original thing is like, I still think it's 90% luck, 80-90% luck.
Yeah, almost everyone. And also we can also see it in our own life that how lucky, being at the right place at the right time with the right skills, of course.
Yeah. Right place, right time. And then, but I think what's true is that you do always have to, if you want like a really good outcome, you do always have to work crazy hard. That's for sure. But then the chance that you actually cash out on that or whatever is a lot of just luck that's beyond.
But the thing about working hard, to be honest, like I also think about that a lot. But as long as you know that you are aligned and you're working toward the right goal with the right people, so that you can mute the noise around you, so you can stay focused. That's also play a very big, because right now I really would love to work crazy as hard, but I can't. because I'm not sure which.
Yeah, it's true. To have something worthy of your work and intellectually stimulating enough that you can pour all of yourself into it. I think now, especially as I'm 3 years out of Shopify, it's an incredible thing. You can't just get that in life, right? You can't always just surround yourself in the right time, the right context, the right people with which to like fully utilize all your skills. So I think recognizing that in the moment is so important. Did I do that? Did I recognize it in the moment? I don't know. Like now that I've left, like I definitely appreciate the time there more and more. But at the same time, it was really hard. Like, trust me, I aged when I was there. I got a lot of gray hairs when I was there. I was pretty damn stressed. One of the teams that I helped build out, just to show you how fast Shopify was growing, like when the team started, it was like 20 people. In 18 months, we're 250 people. Right. And so that's like a new team dropping out of the sky every single week that you have to figure out how to coordinate all these people, and they don't know anything. Right. And so it was a very, very stressful time. Like that's when the whole world was watching and Shopify still had to like still grow 70-80% year over year kind of thing. And so yeah, but it was a crazy time, but I loved every minute of it. I learned so much through it. But it's still just one view. I think like there could have been a million other paths, tons of different other companies that I would have learned a different way to operate. And so, some other part of me leaving, now working on some of my own stuff, one with the co-founder, is to learn again, right? Is to learn again. And also like, I know how Toby runs his company now, and it clearly works. But you want to develop your own style too, as an individual.
Totally. Is there something about working with Toby that you would be able to shed some light for us that we are running our own companies on what are the sort of principles that he's doing that makes this work or unique?
I'd say, I've answered questions about Toby a few times. I'd say like one way I'd describe him is he's really good at going high-low. So he thinks at 10,000 feet, 10 years in the future, and he's able to describe that to you. And you can even see it right now with how fast Shopify is adopting AI and everything like that. He saw that 3-4 years ago. But he's also, so he can go super sky high vision level, and it's backed by like an actual technical knowledge, but he can go really, really, really low. And what I mean by that is I remember in the first year or two, we had hackathons in the company, So it's like throwaway code a lot. But he would jump on in GitHub and like comment on like an intern's PR and be like, I don't like how you wrote this function.
What is his background?
Toby is a developer. He learned how to develop as an apprentice in Siemens, I believe, in Germany. And he is also a core contributor to Ruby on Rails.
Wow.
And so he's very technical, and he wrote a lot of the code for Shopify, and he, even to this day, I'm sure, has a crazy amount of control over like how the code gets developed in Shopify. But it was always wild then to see like, whoa, the CEO of this $1 billion company, who's a billionaire himself, is like going into the code during hack days for an intern's code and correcting the function that they wrote.
And he has a passion for it too.
And he has a passion for it. But what this does psychologically and culturally to a company, which I think is masterful, is that it's not like, oh, Toby's always watching. I mean, some people feel that way. But it's like, oh shit, the details really matter here. The details really matter.
And
like,
you have much more respect for someone hands-on.
It's like, hey, you putting a comma, and it goes to different, non-code situations. It's like, oh, putting a period or a comma here correctly in the marketing copy, that matters. Right. And so that just changes the way that people treat the product, treat themselves, treat each other, hold each other to a higher standard. So that's one way I'd characterize what it's like to work with Toby. The other way is that like, I worked there like 8 years. I think he told me good job 2 times in 8 years. And I interacted with him a lot. And so you can read into that however you want. But like he has high expectations of people.
Isn't it byproduct of we are talking about this as a positive traits because the company is doing great. Because I can also say, and you work with me, I also have that an eye for being pixel perfect, the comma and copywriting and everything like that.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a success story, then people would point to you at these are the problems that you had. You were micromanaging a lot. You were caring too much about things. You were not saying good enough jobs to people. So exactly to
yes. So if you act like that, but you're not actually good, then it doesn't work, right? So everything I'm saying about Toby, especially the short on praise, he doesn't praise you a lot and has high expectations. That only works because he was right.
Yeah.
Right? He's been right over and over and over again about this is the direction to take the company. This is a good product. This is a bad product. He's not always right.
And he was able to convince and rule out, because I've been in that position a lot, and I've been arguing with a lot of different teams, but because I just wanted room to go or make a mistake, or just even for myself, go and see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I budged, I didn't, maybe because I didn't want to. And this is funny because I had, and I'm not talking about myself, but I am talking because I know a lot of other people are within the same position. That because you had a bunch of different experiences in different companies and different startups, you try to change the knob a little bit. Like some of the times you become a little bit much more understandable of other people, their the way that they think, that you wanted to give them room. You wanted to also move back a little bit, allow them to figure it out without you, make calls without you, and it begs the question that where you should be founders mode basically, and where you should let it go. Maybe it comes down to those type of decisions that Jeff Bezos says that if it's going to matter in 5 years.
There's a lot of ways to think about it. There's like those type 1, type 2 decisions. That's the Bezos thing. Type 1 being irreversible, right? So if you're irreversible, you got to own the decision as like literally the CEO. It goes all the way to the top. And then there's a function of who, like everything you just described. It's like, who are the actual people, right?
Yeah, true.
Like,
who are you working with?
There's no one size fits all, especially when it comes to leadership and also managing high performance people. When you manage people that are really high performance, like they've killed it their whole life, right? You got to manage their psychology like a coach or a GM would manage the psychology of a professional athlete.
But the bar was not so high on hiring, or was it?
Depends what level, right? There was a time when there was a crazy talent war all over tech. And so, yeah, I'd say like Shopify overhired for sure. Shopify ballooned from like 7,000 to 12,000 people in like 2 years at one point. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of people that joined that weren't that effective, but they're usually not like senior leadership or anything like that. So there's again, no rules. It depends on the dynamics of the talent market. If you're good at firing as a company, it's actually okay to be not that great at hiring, as long as you're able to fire quickly, because can you identify this person's not good and then you can get them out, etc. Right? But I'd say for like the high profile hires, you do give a lot more rope, because like getting them in the company was not like someone applied from LinkedIn. It's like you did a huge sales job to get this person in, right? You had to like convince them to leave already a high profile job when they always have a promotion coming and all these types of things, and they have a lot of options. And so if you work so hard to get this person in because you believe they're going to be amazing, think of the psychology of that person as well. You've been courting them. You've been selling them, saying that you're going to be able to run a huge part of this company. You're going to have autonomy. That's what people want, all this type of stuff. And so if they come in on day one, you micromanage the shit out of them, right? It's like not going to be a great start. So you're also kind of like worried as the hiring manager in that case, that like you don't want to screw up what took you so long to get in terms of this person. But then at the same time, you are responsible for their work. And Toby and a lot of other executives, they don't care. They don't care how long you spend getting this person. They're like, this product sucks.
Yeah,
right?
that's another thing.
Yeah.
Like,
so you have to choose. You have to choose how much risk do I take on myself.
Brandon,
right?
you know, like the thing is that the type of discussion that we're having, because to me, I've been intuitively like that. You know, I was not trying to be a badass manager or a dictator manager. Intuitively, I was like, okay, this sucks, this and that. But when you are working with a theme, you know, like I do remember that, for example, we had deadlines that are being missed, you know, and then we've been okay with good enough. You know, I was not okay with it because I knew that meeting a deadline is kind of an internal thing, but the byproduct of shipping something that is not crafted enough, and then the report of the bugs coming in, then that it's going to involve the support team, and then you have to log those bugs, and then
and you're hurting the brand.
Cost of it is going to be way much higher than giving it another week, you know. But some people internally are going to be so much trying to save faces that we are not going to miss deadlines that it's going to be really hard, you know,
because they're misaligned.
Yeah.
People are acting in the way that they're rewarded and punished. If they miss a deadline, then if their manager sees that as a negative and then they don't get promoted or fired or whatever, that's all they're going to optimize for. But if the company optimizes for the quality of the product that goes out, and that's the way people are rewarded and punished in the bad sense, right? Then people will always make the right trade-off there. So that's really basically culture.
It is culture,
right? And so the hard part about the quality bar is the quality is often subjective.
We're the second person in beside Toby that helped, because it takes more than one person.
Sure, it takes way more than one person. Yeah, I'd say that's what our job was. Our job was to hold the bar.
The PMs.
I'd say more senior leadership, like VP level.
Love
people,
that.
Right? Our job was to hold the bar. And
I remember I hired a PM, and then every time that people were shopping on the first push to the Git that they had, and then we were reviewing the work, the PM was like, amazing job, great work, blah, blah, blah. And after and it was a new hire. And I was like, I don't see you make any complaint about this part sucks or that part sucks, you know?
Yeah.
And they were like, but that is my job to ship. And I was like, no, actually, I'm putting you as a guard here. You know, I don't want...
Your job is to ship good stuff.
Yeah, you know, like, so...
don't forget the end, right?
But I think it all comes down to people, man. You know, like I'm not even sure that to what point you would be able to train people for it. This is something that you need to have a taste for it.
I think it's both. I think there are some people that have taste innately, and you want to be able to hire those people. But I do also think, like, what does the organization reward? People are all very adaptable, right? If no one ever cares that you shipped on time, and this actually, Shopify is quite good at this. We'd be like, yay, like this happened all the time. I even did it sometimes. I was like, yay, congrats on everyone. We shipped this thing today. The emails went out, the websites, the landing page is up, you know, the tweets are out. Everyone's like, yay, lots of Slack emojis. And then Craig, who was always great, would come in and be like, how are we measuring success here? Right? Or he'd be like, are people using it? Like, how many people did X? Right? And sometimes I'd be like, oh, that's so deflating. Right? We worked 9 months.
I was that person that I started hating myself.
Totally.
You know, like to an extent that this is what happens. I don't want to talk but
sure. Well, you were a co-founder.
I departed the company of the team that I built myself.
Yeah. But you know what? I learned through observation and through how him saying those things affected me is that's the right idea. That's the way to do it. You're in the moment, that's when you need to refocus everyone on what actually matters. Right. And then, so I started employing that all the time. And then, I would get the hate too. You know, I would say something like that in a public channel, and then I'd get a bunch of DMs from people saying like, hey, could you at least like give a thumbs up or something like that? They worked really hard on this. Like they worked over the weekend on this. Blah, blah, blah.
I'm not feeling it, man. I cannot do it.
And it's hard. And it's like, you do want to, I guess, like applaud the effort, but you can't have people thinking that's success, you know, or that's why, or that's how we are measuring if we're effective as a team. And so, yeah, you got to be, it's hard. It's really hard. You got to be, I'd say like, you know, one of the other reasons I left Shopify, aside from just like wanting to, you know, build some stuff myself and just go off on my own, is it's hard being in senior leadership. You gotta be an ass, not an asshole. Sorry. You gotta be, how do I say this? You got to say no way more than you're used to, and in uncomfortable social situations, and that is your job.
But you weren't finding yourself when you were driving your own startup. Or let me rephrase my question. Having said that, now that you're building your own thing, two questions. What are the things that this time you're doing differently, knowing that you already had a startup, and then you joined Shopify, and then you learned a bunch of other stuff, and now you are creating another company of your own. This time, how you're doing it differently. And would you miss being part of a big corporation with a lot of other people smartly working together?
I mean, so to answer the last part, yeah, I definitely miss that, because I miss the energy of lots of really smart people, and like having all the resources and the brand awareness and the scale and all that type of stuff. Like the reason a lot of people spend their whole life in these executive roles until retirement, and they never go and build their own company or whatever, is because it's a very high status job, right? Like I had assistants. Like if I have to go speak at some conference or whatever, I don't have to deal with anything. I just wake up one day and like there's like a car that picks you up. You go to the airport. You don't know where you're staying that night. Like everything's taken care of for you. Everywhere you go, you know, people are like happy to see you and like know all about you and all this type of stuff. It's like a very high status job, very addicting. A lot of people are addicted, not even to the money, but to the status of those types of working in those like big companies. So right now, starting another company now, I'm learning nothing. I'm using nothing basically that I use in those big companies, because they don't, most of the stuff I didn't apply. The only thing, actually, no, I shouldn't say nothing. The only thing that I am using is the thinking, the long-term thinking that I observed there. So the way that like the company made and Toby made decisions, understanding how, you know, extra work to like build something the right way. And that could be a technical thing, like the way, I don't know, you'd make the data model or something like that, or just taking the time to like make this part of the product like perfectly polished, like that. Those are the things that compound over time. That's the only way you make a big company, is by like the foundations and the craft underneath has to be super, super solid. Right. So not rushing into things and knowing when, like, you know, if I have high ambition about what this next company is going to be, that there are some things I need to take the time on now. But other than that, you know, everything else is changing. Like you can build software, things that used to take literally 5 years, you can build in 1 week now.
Yeah,
truly 1 week with some good prompting. And the bar for software is as low as it could ever be. I have friends that are like, they're like physiotherapists, and they're vibe coding their own like front office, like their own website and front office, like book your own meeting or book your own treatment and stuff like that themselves already. Like that's how easy it is now. Okay. So what changes then? If there's going to be like 1 million times more software out there and everyone in the world's not going to value software anymore, like what you build needs to be like really, really good. Really good. It needs to basically compete with someone else doing it by themselves, but just and doing it by yourself is easy. You just ask, you know, I want to make me a personal finance app. Claude.
Yeah, or even finding someone that created the very good one.
Just copy that.
Copy that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are still skeptical about the fact that this is not so true, you know, but come on, my man, this is true. It's going to get there. Or even if you're not there right now, it's going to be there very soon.
I won't name the product, but a few months ago, just to demonstrate to a friend, I said, I'm going to replicate this product by the weekend. And so what I told the agent is, we're going to make a clone of this product. I signed up for an account. I was like, here's the login credentials for this product. It's logged in the browser. I want you to go in and click on every single link possible in this browser and take a screenshot of every single of this app and take a screenshot of every single page. Then I want you to go to the docs and I want you to download all the docs, all the API docs, everything like that. And then I want you to make a plan that completely reproduces this entire product. That was a short prompt I just gave. That was one paragraph. It friggin' did the whole thing. Because it has everything. It has every screen that a user can see. It has the docs, API docs, so it sees the data model, right? It sees all the features. It can figure it all out. So
there is another interesting use case that I've recently noticed that people are doing it with computer use, because this is kind of something that still is not good. It's slow, like versus working with APIs and everything else. Mm-hmm. And till to this date, I have been trying to solve a lot of my own problems. I haven't been able to. Imagine like creating this podcast, still, although that there are so many softwares for caption, for creating clips and all this stuff, but I haven't found myself like really trying to utilize it because there are so many different processes are happening, and usually most of the challenges are that there's no API. Like YouTube doesn't have an API so that you would be able to automatically upload or all of these type of stuff. But I saw someone with this new computer use feature that is actually getting a little bit better, is that now you can record yourself doing all the process. It reminds me the automation in Photoshop that you used to create a bunch of filters and do a bunch of stuff, and then you press apply and it starts batch applying it to thousands of images. But now you would be able to showcase that how you go and write your titles, how you brainstorm on even the agent itself, and then you open YouTube and then you upload it, and then you record yourself, your whole process, you screen record yourself, and then you fit it to AI, and then even though that there is no API or anything like that it can connect to, but it uses your own computer doing the exact same thing, or figure it out how the way to go around it.
Totally. Like these things that seemed impossible to scale, it's like everything's becoming possible now. And it really trips me up. Like one of the fun things and hard things about building the startup now is like, I don't know what the bar is for a product that's worth existing, And
I'm on that stage, man. Like I was so excited about building something new, and I actually built a lot of stuff, which some of them I'm really proud of. Like the roundtable one was really good one that actually had a use case for myself. Because you know how you are used, because I am still like, I have a preference on when I'm using Claude or when I'm using Gemini. You cannot ask Gemini to rephrase something, Claude to rephrase something for you. It's going to take ages because it's going to really take their time and thinking, or you have to change your model. But Gemini, I found it more good for subtitles and everything that is a little bit about human reading it. Claude is really good with coding and all this stuff. But I also was so excited about now that I can create a lot of stuff, and because I do believe that I do have the taste and those intangible things, I feel I even have a bit of a more advantage toward an engineer, but because when building things become easy, the value also decreases. I felt,
it does.
And
it does.
I was like, what is worth building right now?
What
and
is
I
worth
was
building?
like, dude, you've been full of ideas. And now I look at those ideas, even I look at my notes and all of the ideas, and I'm like, I'm no longer feeling it.
Yeah.
I don't know is it because it's now easy to build, or is it not worth it anymore?
I think those are aspects of it. When you can easily imagine that someone else can replicate what you did like that, it's hard to feel like it's something you should keep pouring into, right? And so, one thing, I'm actually writing something for the first time in like 10 years. And this post is actually about this, which is like, the whole idea is like building a product harness. So a harness in a coding agent is like the environment that the model lives in to be able to code well, the tools it can use, like how it upstream talks to the LLM and all these types of things. A product harness is sort of like, what's the environment that you're creating so that you can keep these agentic loops going and make something more and more and more and more complicated. Because I think what's really good right now is copying and prototyping, but evolving and building more complex software, I think is still a challenge, right? If you build some really complex stuff, you throw a bunch of agents on it, it's going to break. It's going to break. And so how do you make things that are like reliable, maintainable, all these types of things? So even to go back to your, the question I didn't fully answer, which is like, what am I doing differently now? It's like, it's all about having a better intuition on like, what is a product that's defensible, and then distribution.
And trust your intuition.
And yeah, you have to trust your intuition, because that's the fun and whole point.
It took me 20 years, to be honest, to trust my intuition.
If I'm not going to build on my own intuition at this point, then just give up on yourself.
No, but because the intuition thing doesn't feel natural, that it's logic. Mm-hmm. Like you don't feel like you've processed it enough.
Yeah.
And that begs the question that, am I just being lazy going with this intuition? Mm-hmm. Or should I just go and process it a little bit more? Mm-hmm. And after you process it so many times, and then you come to the conclusion that the first intuition was right, even in art, like even in making music, when you have a different versions that you cannot make a decision on which version is good to go, it's always version 1.
Yeah, totally. I think it'd be cool to actually, like, even just to you for this conversation, like to show you.
Would love to.
What I'm working on.
You want me to give you a Google link meet?
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. Just because I think it'll help.
And do me a favor, do a screen recording with QuickTime.
With Kick at the same time? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you see the screen?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so this thing's called Every.ai. Basically, it is helping SMBs that run client businesses. So people that have like a list of clients that they provide some service to. So for example, a lawyer.
FreshBooks.
It's actually another way to describe this is, imagine HubSpot and FreshBooks had like an AI pilled baby. Okay.
Yeah, I saw it, and then I was like, I exactly knew it's Brandon. It's like a CRM, invoices.
Yeah. So the whole promise is that, like, as a small business, you can bring in your whole client list and actually your whole network, which I'll talk about in a second, and it will help you find more customers, send them project proposals. And then eventually, when you fulfill the service, whatever it is, like say you do some freelance design for them, you can invoice them, get paid, and do all the stuff that, like, on the billing side. And so here's an example of, this is just like a test environment. But what's cool about the product is that it does everything, like you mentioned FreshBooks. So it does everything that FreshBooks did in terms of like invoices, getting paid, capturing your expenses, like time tracking, all that type of stuff. And it kind of does a lot of stuff that HubSpot did in terms of like pipeline, clients and contacts, et cetera. So the flow really is that you connect your Google Workspace. And one thing it does out of the box is it starts to use AI agents to mine everything that it can learn about your business. And so in this case, my co-founder, we put in BetaKit, like that publication, as like a test case. But what you're seeing in this business context is what the AI agent learned about about you, the business, when you joined. And then it figures out, like, what are you as a business? What kind of things do you sell? What metrics do you care about? And then also things like, what's your voice? When you talk to customers or clients, how do you speak to them? When you talk internally, how do you speak? And this actually becomes the system prompt for Every's agent. So Every's agent has all the knowledge about your business every time that you talk to it. And it basically is able to act like your chief of staff.
So basically the software first interviews you.
But it doesn't even interview you. It just automatically just starts pulling information and figures it out.
Oh, got it.
So you don't fill out a single form. It figures all this stuff out on the fly. And
where does it get the first initial content?
So when you when you sign up, you're signing up with like your Google Workspace. So it has access to like your calendar, your email, all these types of things. It's a rich treasure trove of information.
So it goes and look to the previous emails that you already written. And This is the tone that you...
Exactly. At the same time, it will download all your contacts. Okay. So in this case, there's like thousands and thousands of contacts. It downloads all those contacts, and it's able to actually take some of them and enrich the data around them. So it'll go on the internet. And again, all this stuff's happening automatically just as soon as you sign up. It goes on the internet and it finds out like, where they work, what your previous correspondence is with them, all those types of things.
A phantom booster built in.
Yes, exactly.
But are you using an API of a third party for this? So how do you enrich them?
We built it all ourselves. We built it all ourselves with browser computer use agents, searching that person's name, figuring out which one's a real one or which one's high likelihood not to be.
Isn't this a startup on its own, just enrichment? Because like either Phantom Booster or Clearbank, or you need a third party that they already have a huge existing database of all.
But all those companies you just mentioned, those are all pre-AI companies.
True.
Right? Actually, and so remember we talked about what's the bar? This stuff is so easy now. Well, it's not that easy. It's going
to be so hard to switch right now. They just can't get over the fact that they've worked on it for so long.
Totally. Yeah. So there's like a lot of like sunk cost fallacy, right? And so all these types of things we fold in, and it's just like free. It's just free part of the product.
But you do it clean because you first look at the name and then you start the search on that name.
Yeah. And then we also have we use agents as judges to basically say like, is it high confidence that this is the actual person or not? Mm-hmm. If not, then we don't try to populate anything.
Okay. Got it.
And then all that stuff, we look through your inbox and we start populating a pipeline. Do you know what a pipeline is?
Of course.
Yeah. So what's cool about this pipeline is there are pending deals and then people actively in the pipeline. We actually populate automatically.
There's a pipe drive style for sales pipeline.
And then, all these pipeline statuses, they're actually automatically inferred by whatever status is in your inbox. So we're listening to your inbox. So if you had if Alex emailed you, it would automatically fire a webhook and our platform would pick it up. And then the agent will look at Alex, right? And this is what we have for Alex. We have a goal. Again, this is all kind of like weird information because it's like a test account, but we have a goal that the agent is trying to achieve with Alex. Okay. So we are trying to basically sell Alex on sponsorship in our publication in this case. The agent makes this whole sales plan for Alex. Okay. And it recommends a bunch of things that you could do to move Alex along to the next stage. And then and you kind of work with it. So you say like, oh, you haven't talked to him in a long time. Maybe you should just say hello. Maybe you can offer to do a discovery call with him. And then we're listening to all the activity of every data source we can find about everything you're doing and interacting with Alex on. And really, think of it as like you have a CRO, like a sales agent that's pairing with you on trying to close this guy. That's what's happening right now. And then it does all this stuff automatically in terms of all the contacts you have in here. And then the pending deals is interesting. This is basically, we learned that for small businesses, 99.9% of their clients come from their own network. Word of mouth, people you already knew, I used to work with this person, etc. But people don't actually prospect their network in a very rigorous way. So I'll give you an example. You may know someone you went to university with, but and say you're a freelance designer, you have no idea that this person works at an advertising firm because you haven't talked to them in 20 years. So when you import your LinkedIn network, which you can do on this platform, we get agents to go through all like 10,000 of your contacts and figure out who do you know, how do you know them, and are they a fit for what it is that you sell? Mm-hmm. And then for each of those things, the agent gives a fit score and a relationship score. Relationship being like, how strong of a relationship do I have with this person? If I haven't talked to him in 20 years, it's pretty low. And then the agent uses that information to say like, okay, in that context, think about it. If I haven't talked to this person in a long time, the first thing I need to do is not pitch them on my freelance design. It's to say, hi, what's up? Where in the world are you?
One question though. Yeah. I totally get what you're doing, but one thing that comes to mind is that would you be able to justify the cost of all the tokens that is happening behind the scene versus the amount that you're charging them? Because there's so much happening behind, and probably
It's a lot of compute.
it's a lot of compute, and they are not efficient because they have to do a lot, like something that a human might be able to just make a call on it, but they have to go and see just the fact that if this is a real person.
Totally. So a lot of work we do is actually making these things super cost effective and efficient. So you can actually break down your usage. Every plan gets like a certain amount of credits per month, and then you deduct from that usage depending on whatever you do. So like in the agent here, by the way, you can just do whatever. So you can say like make an invoice for, I don't know who, ABC company for 2 hours of design work at $200. While that's going, like you can start to break down all the different agentic things that's happening. And this is where like we are not all in on any particular model. So for example, I actually just refactored recently to use some open source models for some of the prospecting stuff. And I was able to get the cost down for every lead that we give someone. It's costing the platform like 3 cents.
Oh, wow. What are the models behind the scene? So probably you're orchestrating between different models, huh?
Yes. So we have our own custom harness and orchestration layer. And basically we use everything. Like the main agent that you talked to here is going to be Claude. And you can like change like different levels of thinking. You can use Opus and Haiku and stuff like that. But then we also use GPT image models. We use Gemini for enrichment data because Gemini is really good at looking at the web. We use GLM on some of the, which is one of the open source models, on some of the like high reasoning background prospecting work. So here's an example, like, make an invoice. It does all that stuff. We invested in like making our own chat UI. And then what's cool is you didn't see it there, but when the agent started doing stuff, the viewport changed to the invoice automatically. The user didn't click it. So that basically the agent has control over what you're looking at too. Mm-hmm. And so, in this case, it was able to make that invoice. It used default notes that we have for it. You still have like, our other thesis is that people, especially SMBs, they still need to see something. Like they can't just be only a chat, right? So they still want to be able to like find the invoice they looked for, and they want to see it, and they want to be able to view what it is that the end client sees. They want to be able to save PDFs. They want to be able to do everything that they used to be able to do, but then have agents do as much of that as possible, and then be able to do way more than they used to be able to do. So that's like sort of like some of our theses. And the other thing is this chat interface here, it crosses modalities. So you can actually do this from ChatGPT. You can do this from email. You can talk to our agent in all those different modalities as well. So some people, like we have customers that don't even ever open the app. They only email the agent. And they just say, hey, and so say they have like this happens actually a lot. They have I'm a freelance designer. I'm having an email thread with a potential client, and we're like talking about the scope and blah, blah, blah. And they're just like, okay, great. Why don't you start on Monday? And then all this person does is they forward that email thread to the agent and say, draft me up a project proposal based on this conversation. And then they just get it back in their inbox.
You basically stitched the relevant tools together. I actually have a very ultimate question that I want to get your thoughts on it, because I also
let me try this out.
So let me show you something very quickly. That this is something that I built a year ago, maybe. At a time, Claude and Anthropic, they didn't exist, so they were not Claude code. I built it with Lovable basically at a time. So this was something that I initially really wanted for myself, and the problem was that as the CPO in my own company, which we were like selling to enterprise companies, I had this challenge of what should we be focusing on. There were so many bug reports and feature requests and discussions were either on Zoom calls with the sales team or on Zendesk through support team or on Intercom through chats or a lot of Slack messages that people discussed. And a lot of them were within emails, and I was like, since we were a remote company, it was so fucking hard for me to go and look where should be looking at and what are the most requested features, what is it worth, what are the features that we have to make a call. And because we were a horizontal product, it was really also hard to make it call, and then you had to know which enterprise companies, how much they are spending, if it's worth it to give the features to them, because there is this feature that has thousands of requests, but the requests are mostly coming from free users, whereas there is these 5 requests, but they are like paid. So I actually, if you can see my screen, I built this. It's a prototype, and this is again, like with Lovable, just quick prototyping, just a way to manifest what I think, and these are actually real product, like I was just like dumping the exact data that we had. I was like exporting as a CSV and just giving it to the system. And it was like showing, it was basically applying all of these criteria to all of these features that they figured out. The AI was first number one, like the pitch page for it. So let me first show you the marketing website for it. Was this one? Tell me this is the one. Oh yeah. So see, world-class product management powered by AI. And again, this is pretty much everyone is trying to solve this problem right now, from Glean to everyone, And why does it go away? And the idea was that smart data collection, strategic prioritization, professional planning, automated workflow, basically I first collect all of the information and then apply one of these frameworks of product management, either it's Rice scoring, Kano model, or jobs to be done. And then this was the pitch, like how big companies are doing product management. And this one is the AI is the way to actually to summarize and prioritize what to build on. So basically, after you have all of the features being listed on for you, you would be able to click on them. And then you have all of this sort of impact and prioritization, like what is the impact of this is going to be, potential risk of it, the strategic benefit of this feature, high urgency alert of this feature, feasibility and execution. I was like even thinking that it can be connected to your HR HR tool, knowing how much engineers you have hired based on the capacity of your engineers on Jira, how many available engineers you have, the difficulty of API implementation, a strategic market fit, doing a research if your competition is doing a research on it, if they've launched something on it. And then at the end, after you have processed all of this information, you are going to have your AI agents. And these AI agents would be able to create a AI-driven trade-off analysis, AI resource optimizer, impact simulator. So for example, you would be able to run an impact simulation, and this is how much user adoption and revenue and cost you would eventually have. Are you seeing this on the screen?
Yeah, okay, it's really interesting.
Or even like, for example, like roadmap and giving the like the API specs and user stories. So everything, because this is basically what the PM has to do.
It's like auto road mapping
the
whole company and triaging the whole thing.
So the question that I wanted to ask you, the reason that I showed you this was after I built this, why do I have an interface for this? This is something that agents, if I prompt Claude, go build me the next feature, the Claude probably, it has to connect to a tool like this, see the decisions being made, all the trade-offs, everything, prioritization, understand what has to build next, and then goes and build it, rather than asking Claude to do all of this stuff on its own. And at some point I was like, this is just a dashboard for me. Eventually I don't even need this dashboard,
I think eventually is the key point. So like we have the same philosophy and thinking, is that eventually the whole platform is just going to be an agent that you access through MCP or a CLI. And everything I just showed you, you're going to be able to basically utilize and operate that independent of the UI. And actually you actually already can. So everything I showed you, one thing I didn't say is we always had this is a good example of like design principles that you can start, thinking in an AI way, which is that we have a rule that the agent has to be capable of every single thing you can possibly click in the UI and do in the UI.
Yeah, and basically with the artifact on Claude, like there are so many things that I built a product right on the cloud, and they are just disposable. You just use it once. It gives you some ideas about give you a bunch of sliders. And
that's like the generative UI thing, right?
Exactly.
Like you could just, and we've experimented with it, but it's a little jarring for users because like the interface changes all the time. That's the other thing to remember, right? Like you and me are not the regular user population.
True. That is very true.
Right? We see these things and we know how easy it is and blah, blah, blah. But like also they don't care. If I'm an SMB selling freelance design work, I don't give a shit if this thing has an interface or doesn't, or has generative interface or doesn't, or whatever. I just like, this is almost like stuff I don't even want to exist. I just want to find more customers, get paid.
Yeah.
Right. And so we always have to remember that like, do those jobs well, and the rest basically doesn't matter in the long run.
You're entering to a very crowded market though,
most crowded.
So I can see where the
very difficult market.
Yeah, because the distribution is going to be challenging, and a lot of people are already using something. Yep. And like, as you mentioned, like it's either being HubSpot or any other tool. Carbon, like there is one of them.
There's too many to even
There's
name.
too many of them.
Yeah. It's not, I guess there's two ways to think about it. One is that it's very crowded because it's very big. And so if you can win big. One of the things we thought of when we went into this space was that there is no Shopify for services, right? Like if you think about it, there's a lot of different things and they all do little pieces. Like some do the FreshBooks piece, some do the HubSpot piece, some do things in between, but there's no sort of operating system that's a monopoly for service businesses. And that's why you see why our feature net is so wide, while we go all the way from the CRM side, all the way through to sales and pipeline management down to invoicing and billing, because we think the entrepreneur of the future is gonna want one thing that can do it all. And also for an agent to do a really good job, it actually needs all those things. If it doesn't have the billing information and the payment information, how is it going to help you find the right kind of customers and knowing what you can expect in terms of revenue you'll generate for different customers?
Would you argue that you have a short period of time to be able to sell this before big companies also incorporate a version of this?
I mean, you always have a short time. I have pretty low faith in big companies being able to basically deal with innovator's dilemma and rewrite themselves. I think that, and also I think that, we're running a different type of playbook, which is basically the Shopify playbook, which is they started with the smallest businesses. You're not even competing often with people switching. It's like people that they don't even have a thing because they're so small. It doesn't even matter.
But how much would we be able to charge them though?
We only charge, the lowest plan is $10 a month and the highest plan is $30 a month. It's not a lot.
But that would justify the cost, the token cost, the production, the hosting, everything.
Yeah, because we were able to do a lot to make token cost efficient. And then if anything, it's going to get more efficient, like dramatically so, right? The same amount of compute, same intelligence is probably 1/10 of the cost a year from now. And remember, these are SMBs. It's not that complicated.
True.
Right?
Is SMBs are going to be your ICP, or is it like
Initial
lawyers, or like, I don't know. Like
I'd say it's more, the smallest SMBs, like the solopreneurs, right? And so there's one reason we think that this market will grow, which is that basically people are getting laid off everywhere, right? Big companies are realizing that with AI, they only need half the people, and soon they're going to realize they probably only need 1/10.
How much do you believe in that though? Because there's also the counter argument that those companies that they actually do what they know what they are doing, because the fact that they are much more productive, they wanted to do more. It's not that there is a fixed amount of work, and now because AI can do this, now we are going to cut half of our employees. Now we are actually going to do more. The roadmap that we had for the next 3-4 years, now we can actually doing it now, and we still need this amount of people, even if not even more.
I think that's just a function of the current capability of the model. Because I do think that, yes, they can always do more, but it's not always going to be, but they can't always do everything, right? A company can spread itself too thin. A brand can spread itself too thin. Like, how weird would it be if Shopify started selling, I don't know, salads, like in the grocery store? It's just not in its core competency, right? And so there's a limit, I think, to any particular brand and company in terms of like, what is expansion that's reasonable with what its product and brand is about. And brand is the most important thing, right? What do people know you for, and why do they trust you, right? And so as the models get better and better and better, coordinating the humans to be able to build all those things is going to be more risky than throwing more compute and having more agents do those things. And even in product design, right? It is great to have a team and collaborate and have different ideas. But when you get to a sufficiently complex system or a beautiful product, it often existed in one designer's mind. You know? Do you know what I mean?
And that's the thing. I think one of the challenges is having more people. The collaboration of those people is going to be way slower than just having one person doing everything.
And then also, there is going to be a limitation on compute, where like we don't have enough energy, literally, to fund, or chips to fund all the compute demand. And so today there might be 100 people in a company, each make, let's say, 100K, and then they all spend 10K a year on AI. This is a very AI pilled company already. But I think in the future, you're going to choose 10 people, maybe pay them $1 million each, and they're each going to get $10 million of compute. You see what I'm saying? Have a higher caliber person and give them more compute budget. They will outperform many, many people with a smaller compute budget. I think that is generally going to be true. Not in every industry, but in a lot of knowledge work.
I'm not sure if you've seen this. Like, NVIDIA has created, like, it's a small box that you install something like a battery pack that you, for example, on your Tesla install in your home, or your, it's basically generate your own energy and tokens per household.
Totally. And I want to be clear, like when I say that companies are going to get smaller, I also don't believe that means that everyone's jobless. Where I was getting back with why we're building this thing focused on the people that like the solopreneurs is because I think that more and more people are going to do more work for themselves, and they're going to realize the only way to differentiate yourself against AI is that you have to be a crazy niche specialist in something, right? That's where you actually add value on top of the LLMs. The LLMs are going to be 99, they're going to be 90%, let's say, better than you at everything, except this one thing. And that one thing, that's your job.
I think I actually had a workshop, and that was the exact same idea that I was like, actually thinking that the future of the way that I imagine how the future is going to look like is that there are going to be small communities. By that, what I mean is that right now, like we're talking about in terms of computers, but all of us are going to Walmart to make purchases, or Wayfair to buy our furnitures. There is one too many. Or going to these big gyms, you know. But I think in future, like communities, like for example, this guy is running the gym, everyone, because right now it's not scalable, you know. But I think in future, like everyone is going to their friend's yoga house, or to their person's shopping mall, or to this guy, you know, like everything is going to be very, very distributed.
Yeah, it's the promise of like hyper distributed, hyper personalized services and products.
Yeah.
Right. I think AI enables quite a lot of that because it enables an individual. Well, it forces individuals to be really good at something niche, right? And it enables consumers to find those niche things at scale, right?
how do you think the distribution is going to work out? Because everyone has been solving this, but distribution is
it's insane. I have no answers. I think like we're lucky we're so small. I mean, maybe it's not lucky, but like, you know, we haven't spent $1 on marketing. We've had maybe 400 or 500 businesses through the product. And we have, you know, let's say 50, 60 paying customers. So it's very early, but it's all through, you know, network, a little bit of SEO and GEO, a little bit of
still the traditional ones. This part of marketing has not been.
Well, the benefit. Okay, so there's two things I think that are different now, or one thing that's very different right now versus prior startup. I guess like startup playbooks. Eras, a great word. The cost of capital to get a product of this sophistication, like I just told you, up and running, is very little. We choose to have an office because we like working together, my co-founder and I, but we don't need to. Literally all we need is our Claude Code and Codex subscriptions, and then pay AI costs and server costs, right? We've raised, and we're also very lucky, like, you know, my colleague also worked at Shopify. Like we've saved enough that we can self-fund for a while. And so like our burn is probably $10,000 a year. So we can be very patient.
I think right now is going to be asking the right question of what to build. Because right now I'm like, I have this infinite possibility of building anything I want. And yet I have a hard time because it becomes easier. I have a harder time to make a call.
Very true.
And
well, they always say like naivety when you're younger creates a lot of great companies because you don't even you don't have a lot of reasons to tell yourself why it won't work.
Yeah.
When you've been around the block a little bit, you can pick a million reasons why it's not going to work, and it makes you not do it.
I should get naive again.
Right? So you get naive again. And honestly, even this thing that I showed you, the Every.ai, it started as like something like one of those features was the beginning product, but we just said, you know what? We just need to build anything, because if we build anything and we just start getting anyone to use it, we'll just learn from there. And we'll just start iterating based on what we learn, right? And so we ended up going more to the CRM deal finding world, because what is it that SMBs need more than anything? It's not invoicing. They only invoice like 3 times a month, right?
True.
They need to find more customers. That's their hard thing. And that's the thing they think about every day. So we got to work on the thing that they do every single day. And that's how we ended up here. It's just like pull from customers. And then now we're just still iterating. And then, you know, maybe like our internal goal is like, we're not going to think about fundraising or anything until we earn ourselves 1,000 paying customers by ourselves. We're going to figure out how to do it.
Of course, yeah. It's an amazing time.
Right. And it's cool because it's just like our own watermark saying, okay, if we can't do that, if we can't get 1,000 customers ourselves, then we either didn't build anything good, or we're so bad at distribution that we're not even a good founding team. Right. So like, let's at least challenge ourselves to achieve that. And then once we get that, then we'll, you know, bring in the, you know, investment dollars and like try to go for something much bigger, much faster. But until then, you know, I sat on the, you know, one of my job I had at Shopify the last 2 years was doing M&A and investments for the company. So we bought 9 companies, we invested in 29. So I saw a lot of money flowing in deals happen. And when you take money as a venture growth company, your options narrow. They don't increase.
No, I totally understand.
You have to.
That's what happened to us,
to
basically.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Actually, we haven't talked about that. I don't know if you want to talk about that. What was your thinking on moving on, and like, what do you think about it? I mean, you can choose to cut this completely after if you want, but this is just for me and you to catch up.
No, of course. We can talk. Do you want to like talk off the record? Like,
yeah.
So. Wrapping it up.
Yeah, wrap it up.
Cheers, man. Thank you.
Yeah.